Well, there are a few people better to talk to. Let me amend that. No one better to talk to about Major League Baseball than my next guest, Mike Petriello from MLB.com. And of course, you know him as one of the gurus, the head honcho with all of the Statcast stuff. And of course, you can follow him on Twitter at Mike_Petriello, good friend of the podcast. Mike, welcome back to Hittin' Season. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing great. I appreciate the straight up lie you just said about no one better to talk about baseball, but I appreciate it. I will accept it and thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do mean that because, when we talk, I like to get a 20,000 foot view of the Phillies from people outside of our little bubble. And I feel like you're a person I can come to kind of give us a straight shot on what it is we're looking at with this baseball team. And in Philadelphia, everybody is talking a lot about the fact the Phillies haven't done much a whole lot this offseason other than re-signing Aaron Nola to a free agent contract. Dave Dombrowski was on WHYY, morning show on Wednesday morning, and he essentially said, yeah, it's been kind of a slow offseason. We like our team a lot, and that's the main reason why. Do you get why the Phillies have kind of done what they've done, or I guess to a larger extent, not done what they've not done so far this offseason?
I get it. I mean, I certainly understand everybody's desire to do more, right? It's funny. I think in two ways they have maybe hurt themselves perception wise and not baseball wise. Number one, by signing Nola so quickly, because that was
Hmm.
like a 2 weeks into the offseason or whatever. That
Yeah.
was months ago, right? So it's not like here's the
Yeah.
big splash around Christmas time or now. It's
Right.
this was months ago. The second thing, and I have to preface this by saying I just disagree with this so strongly with people. It seems like a lot of people don't count him because he was already on the team last year.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
if you sign like the same contract and you give it to Blake Snell, I know that's new and that's exciting. We've improved. And it's like, well, Aaron Nola was not on the team on the 2024 roster for a couple weeks. You spent 170 something $1 million on a top level starting pitcher, the best in my opinion, outside of maybe Yamamoto, depending on what he does. That counts. Like I know he was there, but it counts and it doesn't count less just because he was on the team before. And I know that's not how people perceive it. That's
Right.
like a huge offseason pet peeve of mine.
Yeah, it's the whole running it back. Oh, they're just running it back here in 2024. Well, it was a pretty good thing they had going there in 2023 at the end. And just because those last couple of games didn't go the way anybody wanted them to go, it doesn't mean the team is any less of a World Series contender. I think what really is concerning Phillies fans is you've seen what the Dodgers have done, right? You've seen what the Braves have done. Both have gotten better, and they were already better than the Phillies in terms of overall roster, the ability to win over a 162 game season. You look at some of the projections that have come out this week. I know Fangraphs has theirs, Pacoda has theirs. I talked about it a little bit on the podcast before you came on. The Braves and Dodgers are head and shoulders above everybody else in the National League and maybe even in baseball at this point. So I think there's a little bit of we need to do more to catch those guys. Is there anything the Phillies could have done this offseason, realistically speaking, to catch the Braves or the Dodgers? I think we're maybe miscalculating that a little bit.
It's the word realistic's doing a lot of work there, right?
It is,
Because
yeah.
like you could go out and say, well, spend $2 billion and sign Blake Snell as a middle reliever just as a treat, right? Like
Right.
those are things that aren't going to happen. I don't think you can compare them to the Dodgers because you're comparing them to maybe the best offseason any team has ever had. I mean, that is a singular winter. And I know they tried for Yamamoto and a lot of other teams did. But no, I think that's unfair to say, well, our offseason wasn't as good as the Dodgers. Well, that's true of pretty much every team that's ever
Hmm.
existed at any point in history. So don't even worry about that. I'm not sure the Braves have had a great offseason necessarily. I think the Braves are a better team. I think the
Hmm.
Braves are a better roster. But have they had a great offseason? Like the Chris Sale trade was interesting. They've made a lot of weird sort of edge moves that may or may not matter. Like Jared
Yeah.
Kelnick trade. Like sure, why not? They reinforced the bullpen, so
Hmm.
that's fine. I'm not sure, unless you were going to go out and say, okay, we're going to bring back Noah and we're going to sign Blake Snell
Hmm.
and we're going to, get some really great outfield depth kind of guy and trade Nicholas Castellanos. Like these things
Yeah.
are probably not all going to happen. So I will say that I think the Phillies are not as good as the Braves. But when I look at the National League, to me, there's three pretty clearly good teams, right? The Dodgers, the Braves, and I include the Phillies there. I know the
Hmm.
projections may not, but they're better to me than the Diamondbacks. They're better to me than the Marlins and Mets. And I don't think we need to even talk about the National League Central. Like there's a big three, and of
Hmm.
that big three, there's a big two, is I guess the way I look at it.
Yeah, it's an interesting tier that's set up right now in the National League. Like you've clearly got the two top dogs, and then you've got the Phillies, and then you're right. I agree with you. I think there's a gap between them and other teams that could be contenders in the National League. And obviously the season will play out, and there's still some time in the offseason for things to happen. But the offseason as a whole has been slow too. It's not just the Phillies that haven't done a whole lot, and I agree with you about the Braves. The Braves haven't done outside of Chris Sale. I think that helps them if he's healthy in a playoff series, maybe. But outside of that, I mean, and that's a big question mark as well. Do you also see with the Braves? I look at that lineup and what they did last year, and now everybody in that lineup had a career year. And I don't think that you can expect that Braves offense to be as good as they were last year. And that was really what drove that high win total and made everybody so afraid of them was you had everybody in that lineup hitting 20 or more home runs. You look throughout the starting nine, 8 of them had an OPS plus over 100. So most of them well over 100. I just wonder, do you feel like there might be a little regression there with the Braves offense this year?
Boy, that's a good question. Every fiber of my being, like the analyst who has done this for a long time says yes, like that absolutely. They just slugged over 500. Nobody ever does that. Yes, dot dot dot. And then I look at it individually and I'm struggling a little bit to find the guys that are going to get worse. Maybe Marcelo Zuna, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
he's older. He had a much better year than I thought. But it's like, did Matt Olson had a really good year. It's not that wildly out of line with stuff we've seen from him before. Ozzy Albies had an Albies kind of year. I feel like we're learning that Austin Riley is just going to keep having
Yeah.
these years indefinitely. Like we
Mm-hmm.
just did the top 10 at each position for MLB Network, and I ranked him number two was behind Jose Ramirez, and it wasn't
Yeah.
by a lot. Like I
Yeah.
think he's a superstar. And then Michael Harris, I believe in Michael Harris. And the big guy here is, of course, Acuna. And you look at
Mm.
him and you say, well, come on, he can't possibly have another year like that. And I just wrote about this the other day. He might have another year like that
Yeah.
because if you look at all the underlying metrics, right, and the three guys I'll use as examples are him, Betts, and Bellinger, right? So
Yeah.
Mookie Betts basically got what was expected. No good luck, no poor luck. It's not even really luck necessarily, but expected outcomes. Bellinger, as we all know, probably overperformed what was
Yeah.
expected. Well, Acuna sort of underperformed. He set the single season record for hitting barrels and outs. So barrels are the Statcast term for perfect combination of exit velocity and launch angle. Those should be the highest value batted balls, and he hit into more of those for outs than anyone
Wow.
has ever had. So it's like, am I going to sit here and say yes, he's going to slug 600 again and steal 70 bases again? No, but he's so talented and so young. I'd really have a hard time selling you that I think he's taking a big step back.
Yeah, I wonder they got so much production out of the catcher from Sean Murphy in the first half of the season, and that kind of frittered away. And Orlando Arcia was so good for them so much of the season. Can he repeat that performance in 2024? And Matt Olson again, you're right, big power bat. He's going to hit a lot of home runs. Will he hit more than 50? That number might come down a little bit too. So again, the Braves are great. I'm not trying to sit here and tell people the Braves are due for a letdown in 2024. I'm not thinking that in any way, shape, or form, but just that, maybe we shouldn't be necessarily penciling them in to have the same kind of offensive season that they had a year ago. Just as a whole, I was getting into this question a second ago, and I wanted to double back on the Braves. The whole market is slow, and most teams aren't signing a lot of guys to big money contracts. And there's still a couple of big name guys that are still out there. I think the Phillies are being used a little bit in some of these negotiations in the public, linking them to, hey, they could come, they could surprise if Jordan Montgomery is still out there, if Cody Bellinger is still out there, and of course you've mentioned Blake Snell, he's still looking for a home. Why do you think it is? Is there a reason that you think that some of these guys are still waiting for a deal? Do each have their own individual case, I guess, or is there something larger at work here?
I think I would point to three things. Number one, it's hard to ignore that they are almost all, or maybe all, Scott Boras clients, and obviously Boras is well known for waiting. It's neither a good thing or a bad thing.
Hmm.
He probably should be the first agent in the Hall of Fame. Like he's
Yeah.
the best at what he's done. That's his strategy. That's fine, but that's what he does, and that's fine. The second thing is that all of those players, I guess I would put it this way, right? The guys who signed early in the offseason, not that no player is flawless, obviously, right? But Aaron Nola was highly desired and he signed real fast.
Hmm.
Everybody threw money at Yamamoto and everybody was going to throw money at Otani, even though he was injured. And the guys who have been out there for this long, there's some question marks about all of them, right? I know Blake Snell has won two Cy Youngs. He's also basically had two good full seasons, which is kind of hard to bet on long term.
Yeah.
Cody Bellinger, of course, had the rough years with the Dodgers and the batted ball metrics don't love him. Matt Chapman didn't actually hit that well last year,
Yeah.
despite the fact he hit the ball hard. And then I like Jordan Montgomery, and I was actually surprised when I looked this up the other day. I didn't realize how old he was. He's already into his 30s, and I guess in my head I thought he was younger, and he's not. And very good pitcher in the playoffs, but he's never been that dominating guy. And I don't mean to mean any of them. They're all very good players who will help teams win, and they should all get big contracts. But this isn't like Aaron Judge last year, where you're like,
Right.
yeah, he's Aaron Judge. This isn't like Juan Soto next year. This isn't like when Bryce Harper was a free agent, where you're like, these guys, nobody is guaranteed, nobody's perfect, but I've got high confidence that these guys will perform for me if I give them big contracts. And I don't know that these guys fit into that necessarily. I have concerns about all of them. And then the last thing I would say, and I know this is super unpopular because nobody listening to your show cares even a little bit about the bottom lines of billionaires, and I totally get that. It is sort of hard to like blow past the RSN thing, right? Like the industry is
Yeah.
in a state of upheaval for a lot of teams. They don't know if they're going to be on, I mean, they're going to be on TV, but they don't know where exactly. They don't know what the budget's going to be. I don't think you can ignore that as a factor for like half the sport, and so that at least has to be said, I think.
Yeah, and that's something we don't think about in Philadelphia because Comcast Sportsnet would own the Phillies for a little while. NBC Sports Philadelphia now it certainly is not doesn't seem like it's going anywhere, but there are a lot of teams that don't know which regional sports network is going to pick them up, where they're going to be playing and stuff like that. And so much of baseball revenue is dominated by these local cable deals, like and cable's dying. So we'll see exactly how that affects the sport here in the next few years. And I guess you're right, that is kind of factoring in here. Looking at it from a Phillies perspective, let's just say that the market never comes together for Jordan Montgomery, and it never comes together for Cody Bellinger. And these are the two guys that I think maybe Scott Boras is the one trying to do it, trying to get the Phillies use the big pockets there to get teams to get in the act a little bit here. If they do end up still being on the market like another 3 weeks from now, month from now, kind of like when the Phillies signed Nick Castellanos in mid-March ahead of the 2022 season, which of those two guys do you think would be most beneficial to the Phillies for what they need? Because Montgomery would slot in really nicely in that starting rotation, but they already have 5 guys, whereas Cody Bellinger could play the outfield. They like Johan Rojas. They're really talking him up a lot, but you could slide him into left field and it would make for a pretty dynamic offense, and he's a decent glove in a corner outfield spot as it is. At least that's kind of what you're anticipating, certainly more than what you would get from like Kyle Schwarber, who is never going to play the outfield again.
I think if I had to pick, well, I'm going to give you an answer with a caveat, right? I will say
All right.
Montgomery. And the reason for that is I agree with you, they have 5 starters. I'm not entirely sure how much I trust the back end. I guess that would
Mm-hmm.
be what, Taiwan Walker and
Yeah.
Christopher Sanchez to
Yep.
make 30 starts apiece, right? And then obviously, as you know better than I do, you've got the trio of young, talented starters behind them, but you're not going to see Painter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who knows what you're going to get from Abel or McGarry. And I would say the starting depth behind that 5 is it's okay, but it's not great. So you could
Yeah.
slot in Montgomery right away. Whereas the caveat I mentioned is if you give me Bellinger, yes, I could just put him in center field and that's fine. I got to trade Schwarber or Castellanos, right? That's where you get, I think, maybe more of the impact, because one of the things I like about Bellinger the most is that he plays all those spots, right? But
Mm.
if you've got Schwarber at DH, then Harper's playing first, and that
Yep.
means Bellinger's not playing first. And now you're just basically making him a center fielder, which is fine. I just don't necessarily trust him that much, and that takes away some of that value to me. So on this team, I think I would go for the pitcher.
Can Bellinger play corner? Can he play left field?
He has a little bit. I'm sure he's a great athlete. If he can play a very good center, I'm sure he'd be fine in a corner, but I don't think he's had a ton of experience there.
That was the only that's why I was thinking that he might fit, because you're right. I think if they have Marsh and you have Bellinger, I think the preference would probably to play Marsh in center field and have Bellinger in left, although maybe I'm not right about that.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because I would still love to just give Rojas a couple months. That glove is
Yeah.
so special. Can he hit? I don't know. I hope he hits a little bit. Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe not. But the glove seems like it's top of the line,
Yeah.
elite. And maybe I'm just jaded, not as much as you perhaps, as watching Kyle Schwarber and Castellanos in the outfield the last couple of years. But
Yeah.
to see a guy like that playing every day, I just love to see him get the chance.
Well, I mentioned this too in an interview I did with WHYY, the PBS station in Philadelphia. And I was talking about it's really easy to add a guy and to see like a power guy who's going to hit you a 2-run home run. Very easy to see this guy put 2 runs on the board, right? For a guy like Rojas who can play all over the outfield, he can prevent runs, but you can't really see that, right? I mean, it's harder for a fan, it's harder for a layperson, it's even harder for somebody like me who's been following this game for a while. We can see they make a great play, but because the run doesn't score, you don't actually see a lot of times the run prevention aspect of having a guy like Rojas, a plus plus glove defender out there in center field. And so I think a lot of times that affects what we think is more valuable as a fan.
Mostly true. I think he's so special out there that you might actually be able to get
Yeah.
a better sense of it just because he makes everything look so easy and he's everywhere.
Yeah.
I agree with you, right? If he's hitting 210, most people won't actually care about how special the glove is, even if it
Right.
makes up for it.
Well, Mike, I know you got to run. Is there anything you want to mention before we let you go? Anything you're working on?
Oh, we're always working on a lot of stuff. This year is going to be the year of bat tracking at Statcast. So you can actually measure bat speed and impact point and all kinds of stuff like that. So we got a ton of interesting things we're working on, and I'm excited to roll those out as the season gets going.
Yeah, the Statcast stuff is really fun. Just grown so much since it first got started. So some exciting stuff there. Follow Mike on Twitter at Mike_Petriello, gang. Mike, thanks for coming back on Hittin' Season. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, John. Take care.